Hey everyone, welcome to my Punisher review. I'm going to be going over season 2, so if you haven't already seen it and care about spoilers, please go ahead and watch it and come back when you have. Okay, before we get started, I wanted to mention I was originally going to be working on a Daredevil season 3 review this weekend, but Netflix has been delivering that axe to the Marvel shows, so I wanted to get this review out there before it's announced canceled by the end of the week, if it's not already canceled by the time I upload this. I mean, Netflix even tells us how they feel about the Punisher in one of Turk's lines.
I really don't ever want to see you again.
The season starts off really bloody, puts you right in the middle of the action. I mean, I had to go back to season 1 just to make sure there wasn't a reason Frank's in this hostile car chase. And then it cuts to a bar. We're in Michigan. Frank's lying low. He meets this bartender, Beth. He takes her and her kid to go get pancakes, and the whole time we're in suspense wondering, when the hell are things going to go sideways? Just because that intro. Soon enough, we get that answer when everything pops off in the bathroom scene and ends up with a dead Ringo and a hospitalized Beth while Frank runs off with Amy. Frank uses Amy as bait for the people to track them down. He zip ties her hands, duct tapes her mouth shut, because in these first couple episodes, she is so annoying. So Frank does what he does. He mows down these bad guys. They end up in a jail cell where Frank calls Madani for help, and basically she says, "Kick rocks, we already helped you out." So Frank's like, whatever, we'll do what we have to do. But it ends up that Jon tracks him down here. He brings hell along with his private army on that jail. But too bad for them, Frank's his own private army, and he goes through that forest taking them out one by one in the night. It's one of my favorite sequences of the season. He's totally badass. Meanwhile, Billy Russo's escaping with no memories from the hospital. He has the assistance of that cute Dr. Krista. She's obviously moist just from the fact that he's even using her in this escape. This makes it back to Madani, who decides now it's time to go pick up Frank from jail, just in the nick of time as Frank was about to get no-scoped by Jon. Teleport to Madani's New York apartment. Frank finds himself running into Turk, who's dealt with the Russians before in the Daredevil show. He finds the Russians and learns that they're trying to buy those gay photos from Amy's crew. So now that storyline's on pause. We see Billy goes to visit Curtis just to tag him into the story for real now. And then he goes and meets some more vets with a couple of screws loose, most specifically Jake. So he makes his way back to Krista and we figure out that he's a masochist. How do we know? Because he ends up boning her after she just slapped him and stabbed him in the damn hand. He gets in and dips, a real wham bam thank you ma'am, before going out to train with the boys, for a little old-fashioned heist. Frank catches jet to the heist, decides it's time to go kill my bestie. He shows up, calls Billy out into the middle of the street, and starts taking shots. Billy completely freezes up. It was right here, at this moment, that I knew that Billy wasn't really putting on a show like Madani had originally thought. And until this point, I was really curious on whether or not he was. And I just honestly sort of felt bad for him. So they end up in a huge daytime shootout. It's a really cool scene, but then the cops end up breaking it up, causing Frank and Billy to leave their separate ways. So back at their secret hideout trailer, Amy decides it's going to be cute to, throw this little tiny tennis ball and go, "Oh, time to practice this dope move that you taught me, this disarm trick." And she tries it on Frank, and he puts the damn fear of God right into her soul. So Frank explains how he had the shot on Billy, but froze up because he saw Billy was actually confused. You could tell that Billy thought he was being betrayed by his brother for no good reason, since he couldn't even remember he was the one that got Frank's family killed, or that Frank was the one that even gave him those scars. Then we see sometime later Billy makes a visit to Madani's apartment. She tells him that he's the one that was responsible for Frank's family being killed. He doesn't know if he believes it or not. He shows back up to Chris's place to have her help fix him. They end up falling in love and start smashing like crazy, some crazy masochist, let's hurt each other kind of thing, while we see Billy's PTSD veteran armies causing a ton of crime, making a ton of money doing it. We see Amy running off to her friend that used to work with her that she was talking about earlier in the episodes, who ends up selling her out for the $5 million bounty that's on her and Frank's head. Thankfully, Frank makes it just in time to save her. While they're dealing with that whole bounty thing, Jon's old gang's over here trying to come kill him. He ends up killing them all instead in this sequence where he's just a total badass. Obviously, it's going to be a challenge for Frank. He's over here taking out 5 or 6 dudes that are here with weapons, ready to kill. Kills all of them very violently, and he is still okay in the end. Just a few wounds. Nothing big. So we start to see that he has some kind of a relapse. He ends up bringing out the blow, goes to the next door, cheats on his wife getting some suck from a hooker, and from what we can tell, it's pretty bad. From there, we know Frank and Curtis have been staking out Billy's hideout, but Billy knows that they were coming. When Frank finally makes his move on the gang, they end up ambushing him in some crazy strobe light effect, epileptic, seizure-inducing, awesome light show. They nearly kill him. Billy comes out to gloat, tell them to make it slow. Frank ends up raging, kills them all, and goes after Billy. He sprays into a room and ends up finding all those dead girls' bullet-riddled bodies just laying all over the floor. He starts freaking out. He thinks he shot them. As soon as the police come in, he surrenders because he is no longer on that pedestal that he set for himself. He broke his code. He thinks he just killed some innocent women. He ends up waking up in the hospital hospital. Ends up Karen's there, finally making her appearance for the season, and she's mainly there just to go with Madani to go investigate the girls' bodies. They go over to the autopsy room, they check the bodies out, and they find out that Frank couldn't have been the one that killed the girls because the gunpowder on their wounds meant it was a close-range shot, which obviously he wasn't. They end up telling them. Very soon after, everything starts to escalate after this one cop tries to collect the bounty off of Frank, and who knows how he was even going to try to kidnap him, but it ended up with Frank escaping from the hospital. So soon after that, Curtis is caught up by Jon. After Jon, sneaks up on him by walking through the unlocked front door of the trailer, catches Curtis, who happens to be disarmed with the nearest gun, sitting right next to the unlocked door, nowhere near him. Amy ends up walking in, shoots Jon in the leg with the shotgun, and then sits outside for a smoke or something, while Jon and Curtis end up having this one-leg close combat battle. Jon ends up walking outside and just kidnapping Amy. So finally, Frank ends up coming home. He sees worthless Curtis just laying on the floor, finds out that Amy got kidnapped, and decides to do his own kidnapping. He goes and gets that one gay senator David in order to blackmail his parents, who are also Jon's bosses, in order to make a deal for Amy's return. But before he can end up making the trade, Curtis turns David into the police, and Frank has to bluff it. Amy gets safe, and then Jon and Frank end up fighting, and this is a fight to the death. Madani goes to confront Krista, and we see how truly incompetent Madani is in this sequence as Dr. Krista DeMont, the therapist lady, goes toe-to-toe in an action sequence fighting Special Agent in Charge Madani. Miraculously, Madani gets the upper hand, throws Krista out of the 2-story window, and kills her? It's later revealed Krista is still alive, but in the meantime, Jigsaw sees her body on the floor, believes she's dead, goes to attack Special Agent Madani. He gets up there, they're fighting, she puts 3 rounds in him, and then he chokes her to death? So cut to Billy, he's bleeding out. In his desperation, he decides to try to go get this half-assed job done where he gets the bullets removed from him. That doesn't work, he ends up passing out, robbed of his money, and left in a dumpster to die? He calls Curtis, really ugly crying, talking about, I don't want to die alone, come be a bro and watch me die over here in your basement. But of course, instead we get Frank, who shows up and very anticlimactically puts 2 rounds into Billy and leaves. Frank moves with Amy to go kill the Schultzes, and after putting one into the back of Eliza's head, Frank gives Anderson the ultimatum of whether he wants to kill himself or if he's going to continue living knowing that the truth of what he's done is going to come out. Anderson, of course, is too prideful to watch his name crumble, so we're left with this. Frank and Amy go their separate ways, and for the final scene of the season, we get to see Frank showing up to kill everybody at a gang meeting that he set up, wearing the skull vest and trench coat, and giving us our last Frank Castle roar of the season. Now I wanted to take a little look at a few of the characters. Starting off with Frank Castle, we see that he starts off at a place where it looks like he might be willing to settle down, but we can also see he's looking for something to fight for. Using Amy as bait to kill the people that are after her. We see him claiming that he's doing it to protect others, but we really know he's doing some of it for himself. Right, Frank? So I really like the Frank and Amy dynamic. I think that the reason that their relationship works so well is because naturally Frank's just really good with kids. Amy is somewhere around the same age that Frank's daughter would have been, so he becomes like this father figure to her. Shows her a really tough love because he's protective of her as he was protective of his own family. We see Amy begin to affect Frank in a way that others haven't. We see him spare that one Russian mobster that was threatening the gay senator. We see him spare Jon, and we see him spare this guy. Her opinion begins to matter to him as they start to grow closer, and she becomes more daughter-like in his eyes. And towards the very end of the show, the two give their goodbyes, and we finally see Frank receive some closure on his family dying. And it's that closure that allows Frank to finally embrace himself as the Punisher that we see at the end of the show. Now Billy Russo. He starts off with almost no memory. One of the only things that he knows is that he shot Madani in the head, and his face doesn't really look nearly as bad as it should have after what Frank did, but it's still not that pretty. We see him struggle to remember things and see how he's haunted by that Punisher skull every single time he closes his eyes. And we see that Frank did succeed in making Russo's life a living hell, even though he doesn't really remember why. It almost makes you feel bad for him. Almost. For some reason, the writers decided that they had to make Billy surrounded by the world's worst people. We have Old Man Arthur still pissing on the floor from how scared Billy's made him, and yet 2 sentences later, he starts poking him on the chest and showing exactly why he deserves to die. And the same thing goes for this criminally insane bus bully too. In the show, Billy really feels unwanted, and we see that Krista fills that void for him. We really see that she keeps him at the brink of becoming completely unhinged, from going off murdering with no motive to murdering just with the motive of being with her at the end. But even so, he's still really psychotic. He ends up killing innocent women just to show that Frank isn't better than him, even though Frank's remorse when he was under the impression that he had killed them shows that Frank is already better than him in a way. Not that Billy would even recognize that. He goes around roaming the streets, taking advantage of these troubled vets and then offing them as soon as he's done with them. He still wants revenge, even after he realizes that he's the one who got Frank's family killed, and can't take responsibility of any of the actions he's done. After he finds out he's done them, he blames them right on something else. Billy continued to be a really great parallel to Frank this season, and that's why I really think it sucked how he went out. He should have went out with way more of a bang. Instead, what we get is this really unapologetic end, and honestly, it just left me wanting more from it. Next up, the mysterious presence throughout the season, John Pilgrim. He serves also as a parallel to Frank by doing what he's doing for his family, and if it wasn't for the Schultzes, he most likely wouldn't be involved at all. Just like Frank, his past ends up haunting him, even though his past is a little bit different. Instead of military, he was in some racist gang, he bore the Iron Cross. You see him tell Curtis,
"You know, there was a time not so long ago I would have judged you before even sitting down with you, before speaking with you. I've put that behind me."
We can really see that he's just doing what he has to do. We see him relapse later on after he has to kill his old gang. Then the news of his wife dying hits, sets him back on track. He knows what he's doing, he has to go save his boys. So we get the continuing conflict between Jon and Frank, where every single situation Jon shows he is a formidable opponent, at range or at close combat. So I don't think that Jon's really an uninteresting character, as much as his plot line just played out over too many of the episodes. Eventually just ended up taking a whole backseat to the Billy Russo storyline, which was a way more developed storyline. So we get this whole switcheroo where Jon's storyline ends up taking up most of the finale, while Billy gets his unsatisfying end and barely any of the screen time in the finale. And I really think the season would have benefited from the Pilgrim storyline being wrapped up maybe in episode number 12, while they focus solely on the whole Frank and Billy storyline at the end. Okay, so just a few more things before I wrap this up. The blood effects throughout the season were okay. Some parts they were noticeably bad, but most of the time you couldn't really tell. Unlike the CGI, where almost any time it was involved, it really took me out of the show pretty bad. As for the more redeemable parts of the show, I really liked the action choreography, except for maybe a couple of scenes where people were being choked. I didn't really buy it. I thought they had some really cool set pieces, and I do really appreciate how they left us without a cliffhanger, you know, just in case. I really liked the season. I just think it could have benefited greatly from a shorter season, maybe 10 episodes, maybe even 8. Some less Madani, less Pilgrim story, less Dr. Krista and Billy, which I don't really mind too much, but it just didn't do too much for the story in my opinion. Would have all really gone unnoticed. And something that I really think detracted from this season is just the fact that Frank had such a limited arsenal throughout the show. Some of you guys might have noticed, but throughout the entire season, I was just really missing that season 0 Punisher arsenal. So all things considered, I'd give the Punisher a great 75 rounds out of 100. Enough to do some mild damage, but not really enough to get the job done. But will I watch it again, and will I recommend it to friends? Absolutely.